The more we do, the more people can see it.
To combine the animal world and filmmaking, yeah, it would be an ultimate dream at the end of the day.
And nobody really prints anymore. But when you walk into someone's house and you see this amazing picture up on the wall.
What's left on the cave wall is how we remember our history. It's how we depict what happened. It's the vases that were left over. It's the mosaics that we find. That's how we know what was in fashion. That's how we know what the materials they were using to paint, to sculpt.
Jazz and modern were my happy places. They're the place that my body felt most at home.
I've transformed wanting to do an interesting painting to now capturing emotion and telling a story.
The reality that I'm not as fast as I want to be. I spent easily 240 hours trying to do some animation, and even that much time was nowhere near enough.
Feels like it's been forever since my heart went to sleep. But you got your hand on my shoulder and it's shaking me, sending tingles, tingles down my spine. Bolt of lightning in my mind. I got pins and needles all the time.
So there's that saying that history is written by the victors. That's not true. History is written by the artist. My name is Marley Davis. I think that I have artistic abilities, but when it comes down to it, I do like to consider myself a craftsman, plying a trade. There's a lot that goes into fashion design, and it's not necessarily the design aspect that I've settled into. Yeah, it's really meditative to bone a garment, actually. Just recently, I used to really love to do sleek silhouettes, so I like to play, in my personal designs, I like to play with proportions. I always said that I like to do classic silhouettes with unexpected details, but now what I'm actually learning, because of the way the market is in Grande Prairie, is we have a very large formal wear market with grads and weddings. I'm actually really loving learning the gown making process. So another thing I want to show is the magic of textiles. So this is the same dress, same pattern, and yet we seem to have very different vibes, very different moods. This one, a little bit more edgy, a little bit more punk rock, and then you put it in the champagne colors and you have an instant glamorous cocktail dress. Form versus function, and function versus form. Both are very, very important to this industry. So with the rise of street fashion, we have definitely seen form and function unite. But if I had to boil it down, then form is going to be your cocktail, it's going to be your runway, it's going to be your over-the-top Met Gala. Whereas function is our hoodies. They have pockets, our cargo shorts, they have, again, pockets, they have belt loops. In the 90s, we saw a real melding of form versus function with streetwear. So we're talking about Coco Chanel shooting leather and pearls in an alleyway, right? And people wanted to meld that. So if I were to have my way, I like that. I like mixing high and low. I like mixing ladylike with rock and roll and street with couture. So the difference between couture and ready to wear, couture actually refers to how much of the garment was hand sewn. A lot of people don't know that. They think it would just be high fashion. But couture generally refers to, it has to be like a certain percent was handcrafted or hand sewn. However, a ready-to-wear garment can have couture elements without necessarily being fully couture. And then we see the ready-to-wear, and then we go into fast fashion, which, I mean, it's still, fast fashion has its place, do not get me wrong. Especially if you're just playing with a fun fad. Like if you're just playing with fun clothes, by all means, fast fashion is it. But fast fashion can be a little bit more harmful to the industry. It's more mass production. Textile production is actually very hard in the environment. Ready to wear is your next level up. It's a little bit more handcrafted, and then we go into couture. This is one of the more couture pieces I've created. It was a bridal gown. The bride did ask for something a little more simple, a little less conventional than your usual bridal gowns. But in order to get this layered, textured effect, I cut out a lot of the florals, hand cut, and all of these extra layers is actually built up and hand sewn. So there were actually moments she was coming in for fittings and we were hand sewing these different pieces on her to create this almost armored effect. For its simplicity, it was one of the more time-consuming projects I've taken on, but it was definitely a learning experience. So clothing and textiles is actually indicative of what's going on in our culture. So whether we're having outside influences, whether it's a certain weave, whether we've discovered a new coloring technique, it is very indicative of what's happening. Also, you'll see the silhouettes reflect what's happening. So in the 1920s, women's rights had a big impact on society. So then we saw shapes get more androgynous. Women ditched the undergarments that they would have worn earlier, the cinchers and things like that. And then you go to the 40s during the war, silhouettes got sharp, more pointed. But then all of a sudden when the war ended in the 50s, we got Dior's new look, which was a celebration of having the money for textiles again. So it's scabs and scabs of fabric and volume. So even now we'll see that. We'll see what's happening. In the 90s, hip hop culture was very indicative of how we were beginning to become maybe not even a melting pot, but a veritable like salad bowl of influences. So I do think it's important. I think it's important historically and culturally to keep an eye on it and to see where we're at.
Can you feel it? Pins and needles from the floor to the ceiling. It's in your car, it's in your name.
I believe if somebody does want to get into sewing and textiles, you don't even need to necessarily commit to your 2-4-year program. I mean, just see what inspires you. Pick up a magazine, watch your favorite movie, see what inspires you. Go to your local fabric store and just buy a pattern and just see what it says. Take a local sewing course. Those kinds of things. You don't even necessarily need to know the technique in the beginning. If it's something that strikes your fancy that you want to know more about, then start researching school. There's so many avenues in the fashion industry that you can take. And it doesn't just have to be high fashion. It doesn't just have to be editorial. There's so many different avenues. And I have had the pleasure of exploring a lot of those, whether it's writing, production. So I've been in production, I've been in local client one-on-one. So just explore and see what interests you the most. Like all occupations, there are stigmas surrounding the fashion industry. For example, if you do the production side, if you're doing the design, oftentimes that can be seen as vacuous, when really the reality of it is, it requires a lot of knowledge to build a gown. It requires a lot of knowledge to build clothing. It is mathematics, it is sculptural. It does require a lot of particular techniques. Then if you want to cross over to the costume end of it, you have your own stigmas with that. Then if you go into tailoring and alterations, I guess sometimes people think that maybe you are only hemming jeans, which is very much a skill in its own right. So I don't take offense to anything like that, but even alterations and tailoring can be so different from fashion. So really, if you're learning all these different things, you have quite the skill set. So fashion contributes to so many different areas that isn't just what you see in a magazine. You can branch out to costume design, you can branch out to writing. There is actually quite a psychology that surrounds fashion forecasting. So there are actual professions surrounding what's going to be on trend, what's going to be a fad, things like that. And usually it's a direct relation to what's going on in our world. You can choose straight production, where you're actually just building the garments. You can choose design, which is unbridled creativity, if that's the one you choose to go to. There's even fabric design, where you get to just be the designer of fabric. And then that's a whole nother world because of how diverse the textiles industry alone is. Yeah, so it's quite a varied profession. Oh, yes, as artists and craftsmen, yeah, the best thing we can do is really teach others. And in doing so, you never really know when you're going to get to learn something else. Because the minute you teach someone one way of doing things, they just might come back and show you an even better way of doing it or a new technique. I mean, really, in any artistic endeavor, we're coming up with new techniques every day. So the best thing we can do is pass it on to the young and the vibrant and see, what avenues of ingenuity they come up with. Oh my gosh, start sewing the minute you're interested. Yeah, my grandma used to cut out a little flower in cardboard and give me a darning needle with yarn and let me embroider the flower. Or she'd just get out a swath of stretch velvet and we'd just glue a skirt together that day. It's never too soon to start, even if it's not something you want to pursue as a profession. It's just another art form, whether you want it to be a craft or not. It's the same as taking out a canvas, taking out a pencil.
Feels like it's been forever since my heart went to sleep. But you got your hand on my shoulder and it's shaking me, sending tingles down my spine. Bolt of lightning in my mind. I got pins and needles all the time.